A few years back, my friends convinced me to go fishing with them. I hate fishing. We bought a case of beer and headed to the ocean. We parked in a parking lot and then walked about a quarter mile to our destination. The guys called it Rock Way because basically you would walk by all the grassy area and then continue over a path of large rocks into the ocean. We started a small fire between some stones and the guys started fishing. After a few beers, I decided to smoke a cigarette. Unfortunately, I left my cigarettes in the car. It was late at night, and there was no way I was going to walk back to the car by myself. So I convinced one of my friends, Azure, to go with me. He was the only other person who smoked, and since he had none on him either, he really had no choice. We each had a flashlight and walked back side by side. Azure started telling me a story about weird things happening around the area, but I was quick to shut him up.
Honestly, stuff usually happens when people start talking about it. Know what I mean? Anyways, how's your family doing?
He laughed and we joked around until we got to the car. As soon as I got my cigarettes, I lit one up. Jer said he really needed to use the bathroom and asked me to wait for him. I tried to get him to just hold it, but he seriously insisted. I told him that I'd wait by the car. He walked a little further down the parking lot to do his business. All of a sudden, someone whispered my name.
Boo. Boo.
No one had called me by my Hmong name since I was a child. I thought it was Jer messing with me, so I looked over to where he had gone. Sure enough, he was still over there. I looked over to the edge of the rocks and could still see the other two guys goofing off.
Boo. Over here.
At this point, I'm freaking out. I looked over to Jer again and I see him running away from my direction and heading back towards the other guys. I wanted to yell over, but yelling really didn't seem like a great idea at the time. I ran after Jer. I was a good 100 feet away from the car when I heard the car door slam shut. This made absolutely no sense to me, but I did not have the courage to run back to check. I wasn't too familiar with the area and basically followed the light from the fire we had started. I couldn't see Jer anymore. That just added to my fear and frustration.
Boo. Yeah. This way. Follow me.
The whispering sounded like it was right next to me. I turned from the direction of the whispers and continued running. I didn't even pay attention to where I was running anymore. I didn't follow the light from the fire. I don't think I'd even cared to run back to the guys. I just wanted to run away from whatever was calling for me. Suddenly, I heard someone honking the horn. The honking continued and then I heard the guys calling for me.
Tom, what the heck, man? Tom!
I ran back towards the car. I could see the headlights close by and ran with all my might. As I got closer, I could see the guys run into the car. They kept honking and honestly, that scared the hell out of me. Here I am, running for my damn life, and these guys were in the car making all the noises in the world. When I get to the car, Jer opens the door and I jump in. We waited until we got out of the area to talk about what happened.
Tom, dude, you got balls, man. I was going to run after you, but you were out. Sorry, I didn't know what to do, so I locked myself in the car.
Jer said.
What are you talking about? I ran after you. Someone was whispering my name, and then I saw you run to the guys. I thought you heard something too, sure. I ran after you.
I replied. One of the other guys chimed in.
Tom, seriously, we saw someone flashing the car lights, so we looked over. That's when we saw two people running in the grass. We got scared and ran to the car. Dude, we left the fishing poles and everything. When we got there, Jer was in the car by himself. He said you ran off after someone who was running to the beach. Tom, there was no one else there but us, so we knew something crazy was going on. We were going to come after you, but then we saw you running back towards us. There was someone behind you. That's why I started honking the horn like crazy.
Jer cut in.
It was so close to you. You didn't see it? No way, I just ran. I ran as fast as I could, running and looking for you guys. I'm never going fishing again.
My uncle was taking Highway 29 from Green Bay to St. Paul one day. When you pass Packerland Drive a couple of miles after, you come to a wall of rocks to the right. As soon as he reached that area, he saw a white cloth swept right across his windshield. Curious, he looked towards the right and saw a lady standing on the shoulder of the highway. So he decided to stop and see why she was there. She was facing towards the wall of rocks away from the highway. He slowly crept up to her and opened up the window and asked,
Who are you? Are you a human or are you a ghost?
She did not reply. He asked a second time, and she did not reply, nor did she turn around to look at him. So, a little scared and certain she was not human, he drove off. Fast forward a month, my uncle lives near Pamperin Park in Green Bay, just off of Highway 29. One day, when he came home, it was late, but for some reason, he was longing to go walk around Pamperin Park. He knew he shouldn't, for it was a little too late, but he could just not fight this urge that he had. It was as if something was calling him to go there. So, he decided to give in and drove to the park. He parked by the area where we usually do our family picnics. This was near a parking lot by the bridge to cross the creek. As soon as he pulled into his parking spot, he saw a lady with a white dress walking towards the bridge. She stopped at the bridge, turned around, and just stood there staring at my uncle. He thought to himself, this lady awfully looks like the one that I saw when I went to St. Paul that one night. Strange, how is she here but there is no car at all except for mine? But before he could get out of his car to talk to her, the park ranger came to his car and told him to leave because he was going to close the park. Just to confirm his thinking that the lady was a ghost, he asked the ranger to look at the bridge to see if he could see the flock of birds sitting there. The ranger looked and said,
I'm sorry, I don't see anything there.
With the confirmation that my uncle did not see a real human being, he took off home. That night, he dreamt of the lady. She said,
I've been trying to get a hold of someone who could help me. And since you were able to see me, I would like you to help me. I've been stuck in this area for 75 years now. I need help to be set free. I don't want to be here anymore because it's very lonely. Over the years, I've taken 4 people from the park to come stay with me and keep me company. But over time, they all decided to leave. If you don't help me, this year, another person visiting the park will die.
That day, he went to the store, bought some alphabet and number magnets, a silver necklace with a bell attached, and some rice. He took those items with him to the park and walked up to the bridge where he saw the lady stand. He spread out the letters and numbers on the ground and put a handful of rice to the side. He asked loudly,
Would the lady who was here last night come here if you are still looking for help? Swing this necklace back and forth to let me know you are here.
Suddenly, the necklace was swinging back and forth. He said,
I know you are here now. I can't help you unless I know who you are and how long you've been stuck here. Would you take 1 grain of rice and put on the letters and numbers that spell your name of the years that you have been here? Swing the necklace when you have finished.
Slowly, grains of rice would leave the pile and end up on top of certain letters and numbers. The necklace was swinging back and forth, and when my uncle looked down, the name he was able to spell out was Julie, and the numbers he made out was 75. He questioned the ghost to confirm this by swinging the necklace one last time. After finding out who the lady was, my uncle went to the nearest church and asked to speak to the pastor. He told the pastor about what he experienced and what they need to do. The pastor just laughed at him and told him that he might be crazy. My uncle insisted that they help the lady or else someone will die that year. So the pastor took a friend and security along with him to the park to see if my uncle was really telling the truth. When they got there, my uncle called out to Julie and told her that he was able to find someone who will help her. He told the pastor about how he uses the necklace, rice, and magnet to communicate with her. The pastor used the same method to ask his own questions as my uncle stood to the side with the security. They were able to experience the same with the rice moving and necklace swinging. They now believed my uncle. They brought a basket with a white blanket over to the park. They asked Julie to get inside of that basket and they'll send her off to heaven. Right after they asked her to do so, there was a sudden huge wind that swept through all the park. After the wind stopped, the pastor said a prayer and lifted the blanket, sending Julie to heaven. My uncle has never told anyone this story until recently. I have another uncle who had just passed, and his son drowned in the creek of that park. My uncle who saw the lady decided to tell the story and said,
If only the people she had contacted before had helped her, then maybe my nephew would still be here to look over the family and be with his family through this hard time.
I'm sure you've all heard of the Mongoose Girlfriend of Warsaw countless times, and each time, it's from a friend of a friend that knew a friend of a guy that it happened to. Well, what I'm going to tell you is that I am that guy that knows that person. That person is my uncle. Not some distant uncle, but my dad's own little brother. I'm going to call him Thu to protect his identity. I don't know how many times you have heard of this story, but what I am writing down is how he told it to us. He met this girl. We'll call her Mai. They met online in a Hmong chat room. He got her number and they started emailing and chatting very often. After a few weeks, they started to get to know each other very well. During the Wasa Hmong New Year, Thu asked Mai if he could come see her and hang out with her. Mai agreed and the two of them met for the first time face to face. Nothing was out of the ordinary. They talked, laughed, ball tossed, and even ate together. A few months of courtships go by, and Thu was ready to take it to the next step. In April, Mai tells Thu that her parents were going out of town for a whole week, and that he can come and visit her and keep her company. Of course, being a guy, this can only mean one thing: score! It never came across Thu's mind that he has never been to or seen her house before. So, she gave him the address. He went up there and followed the directions accordingly to her. He got there after dusk, went inside, and the two ate and got ready for bed. He was ready to put the moves on her when she asked him,
Do you truly love me? Will you always be here for me?
Of course, the answer would be yes, so he could get some. Afterwards, they slipped into bed. He didn't notice anything unusual at this point. Thu fell asleep afterwards. A few hours into the night, he woke up and saw that wherever he was, it looked really old and it wasn't where he was originally. He turned to Mai and saw that she was still there, but she looked different and she was wearing some Hmong clothes. He thought it was a dream and dozed off. Morning came and she woke him up. The house looked pretty again and so did Mai. So Thu thought it was just a dream instead of a dream. He thought nothing of it. The second night came and they went to sleep. Thu dreamt that his grandpa was showing him how to run. His grandpa kept on saying,
Run! Run like dogs chasing the deer!
He woke up at about the same time again, and this time he was surely awake. The house was old, run down, and looked abandoned. He looked at Mai and saw that her hair was covering most of her face, and she was in Hmong clothes again. Thu got really scared. He did not know what to do, so he closed his eyes and pretended to sleep. Eventually, he fell asleep. The following morning, Thu woke up to a beautiful house and a very pretty Mai. He did not mention it to her. Thu said to Mai that he had to go and get something from his aunt that lives across town for his mom and that he would be back in an hour. Mai said that she wanted to go too. That's when he told her that she should stay because he would be embarrassed if his aunt sees the two of them like this, so Mai agreed to stay. Thu left, and as he walked out, he took one last look at the greenhouse with a nice white picket fence. He stepped into his car and took one look back at Mai standing on the steps and drove off. He drove directly home. A few hours later, Thu arrives at his home. He went directly to his mom and dad and started crying and freaking out. He told them exactly what had happened. His dad is also a shaman, and so he went to get some red and white strings and tied it around his neck. They planted 2 wooden swords at the front door, and for the next days, the family got phone calls that were silent when they picked up. Thu also started getting ill, so his dad called for another shaman, and they found out that Mai already had his spirit. Thu and his parents, along with the shaman, went back to Wasa to the house to where the girl was. And they drove exactly like how he remembered. They arrived at a very old greenhouse with a big tree and broken fences. The shaman told them to stay in the car. The shaman then started a ritual. They went home that night and Thu had a dream about Mai. Mai told him that he had lied to her and she would never let him go. He then told his parents about the dream, and the shaman came over once again, and this time they changed his name. After many sacrifices and blessings, nobody was ever allowed to call him by his old name, and he was to never answer to it because it could be Mai calling for him all over again. The shaman recommended that he gets married because then his wife's spirit will help shield his weak spirit. He got married, changed his name, and got a traditional Dimbelao a few years later. He still tells me that once in a while he could hear Mai calling his name, but he doesn't answer, and so she thinks she got the wrong person. My job requires me to travel a lot. Over the summer, I had an important business meeting that took place in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. My boss gave me the option to take a 1-hour flight, but I had been stressed and accumulated a lot of PTO, so I told him that I'd drive there, from which I would conduct the meeting and take a few personal days off to enjoy the scenery. He approved, and I made arrangements to meet a friend while I was visiting. The whole trip was roughly 4 hours long, but I was actually looking forward to the ride there. Sometimes I find it almost therapeutic to just get away from people, crank up my music, and sing as loud as I could without fear of neighbors complaining. I had been putting a lot of extra time at work looking over numbers and preparing for the meeting the week before I was due to leave. I had originally decided to leave on Sunday morning to get there for Monday's meeting and spend a few days there until the weekend. But by the time Friday came, I was overly exhausted and just needed a break. I left the office by around 5 p.m. on Friday. I got home and decided to just leave that evening instead so I can have a few extra days. By the time I had dinner, showered, and packed, it was already a little past 7 p.m. I hopped into my car and was bound for South Dakota. 2 hours into my drive, I found myself growing extremely tired. I quickly remembered why I had planned to leave on Sunday morning instead. I was giving myself enough recovery time from having worked 50 hours in a week. I cursed myself and forced myself to pull through until I reached a gas station where I would load up on Red Bull. It took a while before I finally saw any signs of life. Most of the scenery was just farmland without not very many streetlights. I pulled up to a gas station, ran in, and bought what I needed to as fast as I could. I just wanted to hurry up and get to the hotel. Within 5 minutes, I was back on the road driving into the darkness. I only managed to drive about 30 miles out when my eyes were getting heavy. I fought to stay awake, but it felt like someone had glued bricks onto my eyelids. When I started to swerve, I knew it was time to stop. A couple more miles off the road, I came to a rest stop. It was completely deserted. There were no vehicles or trucks inside, just an empty, dimly lit parking lot and the restroom facilities nestled by a dark sea of trees. I decided to park towards the end of the parking lot so no one would peek through my window as they pulled in to use the bathroom. To most people, it would have been a creepy place to rest, but I've never been one to believe in the supernatural. I was always a skeptic, so I had no fear of the creepy, dark woods next to me. I locked my doors, rolled up my windows, set the alarm on my phone, and closed my eyes. I was so tired I dozed off immediately. I don't know how long I slept for, but I was woken up by the sound of drums. I sat up and looked around the lot. I was still the only person there. I thought I perhaps dreamed it. I listened closely and heard it still. It was the sound of beating drums in the distance. It sounded like it was coming from deep within the woods. As a skeptic, I quickly searched for a logical explanation for the strange occurrence. I decided it must be coming from a celebration of some sorts nearby, and I dismissed it, closed my eyes, and dozed off again. The next time I was woken, I felt my car shake, like someone heavy had sat down on the trunk of my car. The sound of drums was getting closer and louder. It was coming from right outside of my car. All I could do was move my eyes around. I knew I wasn't dreaming because everything was as is. The restroom facilities, empty parking lot, and flickering lights were exactly how they had been. Nothing was distorted. I closed my eyes and opened them up again, telling myself each time that it was all just a bad dream. It wasn't. My car was shaking violently. The drums were so loud, and that's when I saw them. My vehicle was surrounded by a group of Indian people. They were dressed in their native attire, completely with a headdress. Their flesh was rotting off of their corpses, and they were rocking my car back and forth, wailing in a high pitched sound. I tried to move and scream, but nothing worked. They pressed their faces against my window, wailing and rocking my car. Their eye sockets were empty as they opened their mouths to wail. I could see their tongues hanging out. I cried and prayed to God. In my entire life, I don't believe I ever prayed as much as I did that night. My heart was pounding uncontrollably. I felt nauseous and sick to my stomach. I broke out in a sweat, although I was chilled and felt dizzy. The drums sounded like thunder, and they wailed even louder. I just prayed even more and closed my eyes. It felt like forever, but the rocking ceased and the drums and the wailing sounded quieter. I opened my eyes to see them dance back through the trees as they disappeared into the woods. The sound started to get quieter and quieter until it was no longer there. I was freed and able to move again. I sat up, started my car, and drove out of there as fast as I could. I never stopped at rest areas anymore. If there's not a gas station with humans around, I refuse to stop. I avoid driving at night and am no longer a skeptic. There are ghosts out there, but there is God too, and He is great. When I was 8 years old, my church went on a camping trip. We would always have this trip every year, and I always looked forward to this event. It was that time again, and we were finally on our way to the campground. We have never been to this campground before, but we were eager to explore something new. More than 50 congregation members were all present. All of us set up our tents and built a fire. Everything was fine. Our first night was normal. At night, the adults would sit around their fire pit and tell ghost stories. The youth and kids would sit around in another pit and tell stories as well. Eventually, everyone would migrate and sit with the adults. The adults had the best ghost stories. They would go on and on about their experiences back in Laos. One of the elders said that if you're a Christian, you know when a ghost comes because the wind will blow and it will rain. If you're a shaman, the area will get cold. After the ghost stories, everyone would go back to the tents and sleep. This night was peaceful. The following day was beautiful. It was a nice sunny day with no clouds in the sky. While the adults were making lunch, all of the kids were playing in the open field. The children went running to the middle of the field, and all of a sudden, it started to get windy. Thinking back to what the elder said, I thought, is something coming? The wind came, and then out of nowhere, it started raining. The wind and rain literally started chasing the kids. We all panicked because we were getting wet, and so we ran back to the campsite. When we finally got back, the wind and rain had stopped. I remember thinking how weird it was that it just rained out of nowhere. I didn't think much of it. Even the other congregation members just brushed it off. We all went about our business. That night, all of us did the same thing. We sat around the bonfire and told stories. This night in particular, I was spooked. For some reason, I couldn't sleep at all. I tossed and turned and finally drifted off to bed. All of a sudden, I heard this loud cry. It sounded like a donkey was crying, but it wasn't a donkey. No donkey could make a noise this loud. Plus, it was in the middle of the woods. It could not be a donkey. The noise was sporadic and it would go on, and all of a sudden, it would be dead silent. There was no explanation to this noise. I've never heard of anything like this at the other campsites we have visited. Being a light sleeper, I was the first to wake up in my tent. My dog, who usually slept by my feet, was now curled up in between my sleeping bag. At this point, I was really scared. My dog is quite vicious, and for him to just curl up and not make a sound was very out of the norm for him. I called his name, and he would just look at me, but still curled up. The noise eventually woke up the other congregation members. I woke up my dad and told him that something was going on out there. My dad woke up and told me to stay in the tent. I was the only one in the tent awake at this point, and I couldn't shake my feeling of fear. Whatever was making the noise was still at it. Around me, I heard the adult men waking up one another. All of them hopped into their cars and started driving around and honking the horns. As they moved further away from the campsite, the noise seemed to travel from tree to tree. With all the commotion from the car horns and the unexplainable noises, everyone was awake. We gathered together to pray and retreated to our tents to sleep through the rest of the night. We were never able to find the creature that made that noise, but when morning came around, we were packed and ready to leave. Our church never came back. I'm 23 now, and I still remember the events clearly. A few months ago, I was watching a documentary about forest demon. I asked my dad if we had a similar belief. He said that it's called the Pinuvai. He then went on and mentioned the time when we went camping. I was shocked that my dad had waited so long to tell me what that thing was. My dad finally told me what he did that night. He and a few other guys brought guns. They hopped into the car to chase the thing away. They said it hopped from one tree to another. The trees would shake like something big had jumped on it, but they couldn't see anything. They could only hear it. On that camping trip, my dad was in charge to choose the camping ground. He said, "We almost didn't go there because the place had been banned from camping for unexplainable reasons." At the last minute, my dad received the call that we could go camp at the campsite. We went, but the rangers told us to be cautious of our surroundings because they've been getting a lot of complaints about the campsite. This has been my only paranormal experience. I don't believe in the Pinuvai, but you had to be there to just feel how the environment changed when the thing came. Also, it wasn't just one person who experienced the thing. Everyone that was there felt its presence.